you're in one hand dealt all these realities of just how ugly and how dangerous life can be.
Yeah.
But in the same hand, you can also see the beauty and the simplicity of, okay, I'm not alone in this. I'm not the only person here that has to go through this. And I obviously don't feel this way by myself. Everyone feels this way at some point.
Welcome to Becoming Virtuosa, the podcast with Dr. Susan Crockett. You're listening to episode number 45, Growing Through the Grit, an interview with licensed first surgical assist and badass military veteran, Lacey Aguero.
Welcome to Becoming Virtuosa, the podcast that encourages you to become your best virtuosa self. Each week, Dr. Susan Crockett goes where the scalpel can't reach, exploring conversations about how to be, heal, love, give, grow, pray, and attune. For the first time ever, she's bringing the personal one-on-one teaching that she shares with individual patients to you on this broader platform. A weekly source of inspiration and encouragement designed to empower you. By evolving ourselves as individuals, we influence and transform the world around us. Please help me welcome board-certified OB-GYN specializing in minimally invasive GYN surgery, internationally in the top 1% of all GYN robotic surgeons, a certified life coach, and U.S. News top doctor, your host, Susan A. Crockett, MD.
I am so excited to welcome back Lacey Aguero for the second interview, Lacey.
Thanks for having me back. I'm really glad to be here.
So, when you were here the first time, I did all your fancy introductions, and so let's not do the whole formal thing, but just tell folks a little bit about yourself.
I am a veteran, and I work in the operating room with some really great surgeons.
Yes.
I get to assist them.
Hashtag she's my first surgical assist.
I work in surgery all day long, and I have 3 beautiful daughters, and, life's busy for me right now. It's pretty hectic, but I'm enjoying it.
You're right in the middle of all that.
I am.
Yeah.
I am.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time to come back and talk to our audience.
Yes.
I think the way this came about was really interesting because we had a conversation about your first episode and had some feedback on that and then realized that there was a deeper level to go to. So Lacey's coming back again today by popular demand to talk about growing through the grit. So that's the title of today's talk, Growing Through the Grit.
Yes. So on our last episode, you had asked me a question that left me thinking and reeling over it, for the days to follow. You had asked me, how does someone get my mindset?
Yeah, right.
And I don't think I'd ever been asked that question before. And so I'm kind of like, well, how did I get my mindset?
It is interesting because not everybody who goes through all the stuff you've been through comes out that way. So, what'd you figure out?
So thinking about it, it got me thinking, okay, well, looking back on past experiences, why do I resonate with grit and grace? Because I did have a lot of grit, and to not own that, I think would be to deny myself, my experiences. So focusing on it and thinking about it, I really got to thinking like someone with my mindset, I got it through, unfortunately, a lot of tragedy, trials, tribulations, the grit of everything.
Yeah, the hard times.
Yeah.
So we can all empathize with that. We've all been through hard times, some of us more than others, some of us harder times than others. But what I've noticed in my practice is sometimes when people go through really hard things, it breaks them down.
It does.
Right? But it didn't
break me down. No. So when you think about it, I learned at a very early age, like, trauma, tragedy, these trials, they were not exclusive to me. Everyone was experiencing some version of their own tragedy.
Right.
Some are more significant than others, but we're experiencing them nonetheless. And I would always have this thought like, hey, am I going to let this break me down, or am I going to try to let it break me open? What can I take away from this? What's a positive I can get from this?
Break it down versus break you open. I think that is really the key point because, well, tell me a little bit more about what you mean by breaking you open.
Taking that experience and not letting it define who I was as a person.
Yeah.
So using it to grow, or using it as a stepping stone to get to the next station in life that I wanted to be at.
Yeah. So that kind of reminds me of when I went through this divorce that I just went through. It was almost a 3-year divorce process.
Wow.
Really
3
brutal.
years?
It was 3 years. And I was required to produce almost 5,000 pages of documentation to satisfy
That's taxing. That's got to be taxing,
his
right?
attorney. It was ridiculous. And most of it was like old financial records. So going back 10 years, I had to go through every single financial document, every credit card, every business transaction, everything. And for me, looking at money, I'm very avoidant. I've talked about this in some other episodes that had been my mindset. But having to work through the process of that particular conflict and being in that battle mode and having to do the parts where I had to get really focused and live through what otherwise could have been a really traumatic event, it really catapulted me up into the next level of transcending into the next level of who I wanted to be, the next virtuosa self.
Right. So it was a 3-year-long process. And I mean, there was really no way for you to avoid it.
It was completely unavoidable.
Which is what we tend to do with most of our tragedies and trials, right? Yeah. In society, we're taught to avoid it.
God, let me avoid this,
Yeah.
Don't break me open.
So you kind of had to sit with it, right? And it was all laid out there for you.
Yep.
And that's kind of where I wanted to focus in on. And it takes a lot of accountability to acknowledge the situations you've been put in and really try to feel them.
Wow.
And you think by avoiding it that you've somehow, you've dealt with it and you carry about your life. But the reality of the situation is we're going to be faced with it at some point in the future.
Right. It'll come back up.
It's going to come back up. And you'll know then if you actually.
So many of us don't really know how to deal with those types of emotions.
Yes.
So in life coach training, when I went through certification, that was a huge part of what we learned in becoming certified. And when you and I were talking about this, it kind of reminded me of that. So you were talking about how to process. Tell us a little bit more about that.
For the processing of it, I want to take my military experience and really kind of hone in on that. We're taught to focus on the mission at hand. We're taught to there was one objective, and you see through the exposure of your deployments and through collaborating and getting to know, the soldier to the left of you and the soldier to the right of you, you're in one hand dealt all these realities of just how ugly and how dangerous life can be.
Yeah.
But in the same hand, you can also see the beauty and the simplicity of, okay, I'm not alone in this. I'm not the only person here that has to go through this. And I obviously don't feel this way by myself. Everyone feels this way at some point.
So it allows you to extend compassion to those that are in the field with you.
Yes. And so taking that realization, the sooner you can come to the realization that you're not the only one who's going through this. Somebody else out there is going through something very similar. It will allow you to sit and process that feeling.
Yeah. So in the life coach training that we did, we're always taught that the avoidant type of thing for dealing with how you're feeling or your emotions is like trying to hold a beach ball underwater.
Yes.
Right? Like stuffing it down and you can't see it. And then, but it's just so much effort. And then eventually it pops up.
It pops up. The minute you think you've got it under control and release it, it comes right back up.
Yeah, but the trick is, okay, well, so what's the alternative? Because so many people, whether it's COVID or loss or death or whatever trauma it is that people are dealing with, so many people don't know how to process it. So what's the alternative to stuffing it down and holding it underwater?
Really sitting and feeling that moment for what it is. I don't think that we stop and take the time to process things. We are a fast-paced society. We want things yesterday. We want to move on. We really should start trying to teach ways of it's okay to just feel. You're not supposed to figure it out. You're not supposed to have an answer for it.
Yeah.
Just feel it. And I think the more you feel it and the longer you can sit with it,
it passes. Right. So
and
getting really still.
Yes.
And paying attention to what's moving in your body, the vibrations or the feeling of whatever that emotion is.
Exactly.
Because it is a nervous system thing, response. And practicing just letting it go through you and pass through you.
Yeah, we're not taught how to sit still. In fact, I here recently in my journey with healing, I'm a mom of 3. The last thing I do, yes, beautiful girls.
Yes.
The last thing I do is sit. And when I catch myself sitting and trying to reflect and focus on my thoughts in that moment or how I felt in that moment, it's extremely uncomfortable. We're not taught how to sit with it.
And our brains go
they go everywhere but where we need them to go.
Yeah.
So really honing in on feeling it and taking the time to just sit with it. And that has ultimately led me to be able to get to my next conclusion of, well, I feel it. I accept it. Now, what can I do about it?
There you go. Or what can I do with it?
Or what can I take from it? Yes.
So that's the difference between living through something and living in something.
Exactly.
Like the example of COVID, when we see so many people that...
So COVID, on every scale, for every individual, was traumatic for us as a society as a whole. So there's trauma that we can all relate to and...
Of course. I mean, that was
And
crazy.
quantify with it, right?
Yeah.
So how do we deal with that? Did we deal with it? I don't think we did.
Well, I know people who did.
Yeah.
And I see patients who haven't.
Right.
I still see patients, see people riding around with masks in their cars.
We do.
Yes,
we do.
And they're not all people coming from the operating room who just forgot to take it off, right?
They just, yeah. So how do you segue that and take it into the next step of life?
I think as women, we really have an advantage. I see my male counterparts struggling a lot more with that. I think as women, we talk about it, we cry about it.
I think we can multitask pretty well.
Yeah, we go to a kickboxing class and kick the crap out of it.
Yes.
I think, as the mother of boys, I have 3 boys and 2 stepsons and 1 daughter. As the mother of boys, lots of boys, sometimes they suffer because they're expected to always be a certain way. And so talk with me a little bit about what you've seen with you and your husband and how in your marriage you've seen each of you deal with like the COVID or the military traumas differently.
It's so recently here, my husband and I have, really been focusing in on our healing, our individual healing and our healing as a couple. And I was active duty and can resonate with a lot of the feelings that he's feeling, but him being a male and coming back, he was very much of the mindset that, he was a soldier and he took that and he operated out here on the civilian side of things as he did when he was active duty.
Well, you learn so many important skills and leadership skills and ways of being when you're in that type of a situation.
Yes. And it worked until it didn't. And it's one of those situations where you see a lot of the men when they come back over and women, they're used to being of one mindset. And now they're no longer in the environment where that mindset applies. And regulating that or accepting that it's okay to take that mindset and kind of shelf it for later use.
Put it aside and to trust yourself that you can
it'll come out when
you
it's
need
needed.
it.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we were having these deep talks about it and he's explaining to me, like it wasn't all for nothing, right? Like how do I apply that in today's society? How do I apply that with our daughters? And I'm like, well, everything you learned is something that you get to teach our children. And now they don't have to experience these things that you did.
It's valuable.
It's very valuable. And he's like, okay, but where do I go from here? And I'm like, well, you're evolving. We're going to figure that out. I mean, if you're not changing, you're not growing. We're evolutionary creatures. That's what we do.
Yeah.
So.
Well, that's beautiful, Lacey.
They're big conversations. Big healing over here.
Big growing. I always tell people it's important as you're growing to make way for well-being.
Mm-hmm.
So as we're going through all of these traumas and shuffling them in our head and figuring out the next step in life and where we want to go. It's really easy, at least for me, I have that 4 a.m. middle of the night where my head is just like processing and thinking about the business or the next surgery or the worry about this or that. And I had the thought this week, I heard it somewhere where it's like, what happened to just making room in your body for that well-being? What would you feel like if you just felt happy? What does that feel like?
Yeah.
Or what does that well-being feel like? And I made myself just set aside the busyness and the thought and just made my mind still and was like, oh, peace.
And isn't it, it's a beautiful thing when you're able to get to that point. And if we could, as people, learn and make it acceptable to just sit and be appreciative for that moment, whether it be the tragic moment that you're in, that's okay.
Yeah.
But to be able to reflect on it and instead of focusing on that negative, maybe make it a positive.
Yep.
For sure.
I agree. Thanks so much, Lacey.
Well, thanks
So
for
much
having me.
Wisdom in today's talk. This was really, much deeper than our first one. And
Hey, you had me thinking.
I love that.
Yeah, well, thanks.
Yeah, well, thanks for joining us today. If you liked our content or you think that one of your friends might enjoy this conversation, please remember to like or share it with other people, because that's how we get to keep going and bring you more exciting conversations. Until next time, take care.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks for listening to this episode of Becoming Virtuosa. To learn more, come visit us at drcrockett.com. That's drcrockett with 2 T's.com. Or find us on YouTube for The Dr. Crockett Show. If you found this episode helpful or think it might help someone else, please like, subscribe, and share. This is how we grow together. Thanks, and I'll see you next week. Love always, Sue.